The crack of a gunshot split the crisp October air as Zora Sullivan watched the last of her belongings go up in flames. She stood frozen, her face illuminated by the dancing orange glow of her burning homestead, the smell of smoke mingling with the metallic scent of blood that stained the dry Montana soil beneath her feet. 1887 had been the cruelest of years, taking first her husband, then her child, and now, as autumn winds swept across the valley, everything else she had ever loved. The raid had come at dusk, 6 masked men storming her small ranch just as she'd finished the evening chores. Thomas had been dead 8 months now. Pneumonia had taken him swiftly during the harsh winter, and their baby girl had followed just weeks after, never having grown strong enough to see her first spring. Zora had somehow found the strength to continue alone, working the modest cattle operation they'd built together, until tonight when the Blackwell gang decided her land was worth more than her life. "Should we finish her, boss?" one of the men called out, his voice casual as if discussing the weather rather than her execution. The leader, a tall figure silhouetted against the burning barn, shook his head. "She's got nothing left worth taking. Let the elements do our work." His cold laugh echoed as they mounted their horses and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the wedding ring on her finger. Zora sank to her knees, her dark hair coming loose from its pins as she stared at the remains of her life. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the dry earth. There was nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and she had no horse, no supplies, and no hope. "I have nothing left," she whispered to the empty night, her voice breaking as she allowed the tears to finally fall. "You've got me," came a deep voice from behind her. "That's plenty." Zora spun around, reaching for the small knife she kept hidden in her boot, the only possession the raiders hadn't taken. Standing before her was a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat. The stranger led a chestnut mare and had a rifle slung across his back. "Who are you?" she demanded, knife pointed outward, her body tensed for another fight despite her exhaustion. The man raised his hands slowly. "Name's Declan Xavier. I've been tracking the Blackwell gang for 3 weeks now." He gestured to the burning ruins. "Seems I'm a day too late to help here." Zora didn't lower her knife. "What do you want?" "Justice, madam. Same as you, I reckon." He took off his hat, revealing kind eyes that contrasted with the hardness of his jawline. "And right now, you need shelter before the night gets any colder." She studied him, this stranger who had appeared like a ghost from the darkness. His clothes were dusty but well kept, his stance confident but not threatening. Most importantly, he hadn't shot her when he had the chance. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, the knife still steady in her grip despite her body's trembling from shock and the cooling night air. Declan Xavier looked at her with steady eyes. "Because I'm offering help, not asking for anything in return. And because out here, trust is sometimes all we have." He extended a hand. "I've got a camp set up about 2 miles east. Food, fire, and safety for the night. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Zora hesitated. The knife wavered in her hand as reality settled in. She had no alternatives. Stay here and she would likely freeze or be picked off by wolves. Go with this stranger and at least she had a chance. "I don't need charity," she finally said, slowly lowering the knife but not yet taking his hand. A small smile touched his lips. "Good, because I'm not offering any. Just one survivor helping another." With a deep breath, Zora slipped the knife back into her boot and stood on her own. "Lead the way, Mr. Xavier." The walk to his camp was silent, save for the occasional snort from his mare and the crunch of their boots on the dry ground. Zora kept a careful distance, studying him from behind. His movements were precise, measured, like a man accustomed to watching his back. The rifle never seemed to leave his reach, and his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, even in darkness. When they reached his campsite, she found it sparse but well-organized. A small fire burned in a rock-lined pit, and beside it lay a bedroll and saddlebags. A second horse, a sturdy black gelding, was tethered nearby. "It's not much," Declan said, gesturing to the camp, "but it's warm and safe." "It's more than I had an hour ago," Zora replied, moving to warm her hands by the fire. He nodded, then busied himself preparing a pot of coffee and pulling jerky and biscuits from his saddlebags. "Eat," he said, offering her a portion. "You'll need your strength." She accepted the food gratefully, trying to maintain dignity while hunger urged her to devour it. As she ate, she watched him move around the camp with practiced efficiency, adding wood to the fire, checking on the horses. "You said you've been tracking the Blackwell gang," she ventured after finishing her meal. "Why?" Declan settled across from her, the firelight carving deep shadows across his face. "They killed my brother 6 months ago. Ambushed him while he was transporting bank money from Silver Creek to Fort Madison. He was a marshal." He paused, taking a long sip of coffee. "He had a wife and 2 young boys." "I'm sorry," Zora said, recognizing the familiar pain in his voice. "My husband died this past winter. Our daughter followed shortly after." He nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire and distant call of coyotes the only sounds in the vast darkness. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. Zora stared into the flames, the question burning as brightly as the fire before her. "I don't know. I have no family left, no money." She twisted the gold band on her finger, its weight both comforting and burdensome. "I could try to reach Billings, find work as a seamstress or cook. Or," Declan said carefully, "you could help me track down the men who destroyed your home." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What use would I be to you? You've seen their faces. You heard their voices." He leaned forward. "And I suspect you're not the kind of woman who runs from a fight." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You don't know me, Mr. Xavier." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you were running a ranch alone after losing your family. I know you're still holding that knife in your boot like it's your last friend. And I know revenge can be a powerful reason to keep going when all other reasons have failed." Zora fell silent, his words striking a chord deep within her. The thought of finding the men who had taken her last connections to Thomas and their child stirred something in her chest, a flicker of purpose in the vast emptiness. "I can't shoot," she admitted after a long moment. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I can teach you. And if we find them, what then?" "Then we bring them to justice." His voice hardened. "The proper kind in front of a judge." She studied him, trying to determine if his words were sincere. "Not vengeance." "Justice and vengeance aren't always different things out here," Declan replied. "But I was raised to believe in the law same as my brother. I aim to see it served." Zora nodded slowly. "Tomorrow," she said, her decision made. "We'll start tomorrow." Declan offered her his bedroll, insisting he was fine with his saddle as a pillow. Though exhaustion pulled at her, sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with flames and the faces of the men who had taken everything from her. Several times she woke with a start, only to find Declan sitting vigilant, his silhouette a dark sentinel against the dying embers of their fire. Dawn broke cold and clear, the eastern sky painted in streaks of pink and gold that belied the emptiness Zora felt inside. She rose silently, folding the borrowed blanket with careful precision. "There's a creek about 50 yards south," Declan said, already awake and rekindling the fire. "I'll have coffee ready when you return." Grateful for the chance to wash away the smoke and tears that had dried on her skin, Zora made her way to the creek. The water was biting cold, but she welcomed the shock of it against her face and hands. As she returned to camp, she found hot coffee waiting and Declan studying a worn map spread across his knees. The Blackwell gang follows a pattern, he explained as she sipped the strong brew. They hit isolated homesteads and small ranches, then disappear into the Bitterroot Mountains for a while before emerging to sell whatever they've stolen. How do you know this? She asked. I've been piecing it together, talking to survivors, tracking their movements. He pointed to several marks on the map. These are the places they've hit in the last 3 months. Your ranch makes 7. Zora leaned closer, studying the pattern. They're moving north. Yes, Declan nodded, impressed by her observation. My guess is they're heading for the trading post at Wolf Creek. It's remote enough to avoid questions, but has enough traffic for them to offload stolen goods. How far? 4 days' ride at a steady pace. He folded the map carefully. But first, we need to get you properly equipped. After breaking camp, they rode double on his mare to the nearest settlement, a small cluster of buildings that barely qualified as a town. The general store was simple but well-stocked, and Declan insisted on purchasing necessities for Zora: a change of clothes, basic toiletries, and sturdy boots. You can repay me when this is over, he said, cutting off her protests. At the livery stable, he haggled with the owner until they settled on a fair price for a sturdy pinto mare. Can you ride? He asked as they led the horse back to where his own mounts waited. Since I was 6, Zora replied, running a gentle hand down the mare's neck. My father raised quarter horses before he lost the farm. Declan nodded, seemingly pleased. Good. We'll need to move fast. Their next stop was the telegraph office, where Declan sent messages to several territorial marshals, updating them on the Blackwell gang's movements and their own plans to track them to Wolf Creek. As they prepared to leave town, Zora noticed him loading extra ammunition into his saddlebags. You said you'd teach me to shoot, she reminded him. He looked up, studying her face for a moment before nodding. We'll make camp early tonight and start your lessons. True to his word, they stopped while the sun was still several hours above the horizon, setting up camp in a small clearing sheltered by pines. After tending to the horses and starting a fire, Declan retrieved a revolver from his saddlebags. This was my brother's backup piece, he explained, checking the cylinder before handing it to her. Grip first. Smith & Wesson .38 caliber. Reliable and not too heavy for your hand. Zora took the weapon carefully, surprised by its weight despite his assurance. She'd seen Thomas handle guns countless times but had never fired one herself. First rule, Declan said, his voice taking on a teacher's tone. Always treat it as if it's loaded, even when you're certain it's not. He spent the next hour patiently explaining the mechanics of the revolver, demonstrating how to load and unload it, how to hold it properly, and how to sight along the barrel. Breathe in, then halfway out, he instructed as she took aim at a knot on a distant pine trunk. Squeeze gently, don't pull. Her first shot went wild, the recoil stronger than she'd anticipated. But by her 6th attempt, she managed to hit the tree, if not the knot she'd been aiming for. Good, Declan nodded, genuinely impressed. You're a quick study, Mrs. Sullivan. Zora, she corrected him, lowering the revolver. If we're to be traveling together, you might as well use my given name. A smile touched his lips. Zora, then. He took the gun from her, checking it before returning it to its holster. We'll practice more tomorrow. For now, let's get some food in us. As they ate the simple meal of beans and salt pork, Zora found herself studying her companion more closely. In the golden light of sunset, she could see details she'd missed before: a small scar that cut through his right eyebrow, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he concentrated, the careful precision in all his movements. You weren't always a bounty hunter, she observed. Declan glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. What makes you say that? You're too methodical, too concerned with doing things properly. He chuckled, the sound warm in the cooling evening air. You're observant. No, I wasn't always tracking outlaws. I was a surveyor for the railroad for nearly 10 years, before that a soldier in the Union Army. And now I'm a man with a purpose. He set aside his empty plate. Same as you. They lapsed into silence, but it felt different from the previous night, less strained, more companionable. As darkness fell fully around them, Zora found herself sharing stories of her life before, of Thomas and their dreams for the ranch, of the daughter they'd named Emma who had lived only 4 months. Declan listened attentively, offering no platitudes or empty comforts, just his quiet attention and occasional nods of understanding. In return, he spoke of his brother Daniel, 3 years his junior but always the more responsible one, the one who'd chosen to uphold the law while Declan wandered the expanding railroad lines. I should have been there, he admitted, staring into the flames. He'd written asking me to visit. I was planning to, once I finished the Colorado survey. You couldn't have known, Zora said softly. No, he agreed. But I could have been there before, been more present in his life while he was living it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Regret's a poor companion on a long journey, but it's a persistent one. Zora understood all too well. She too carried regrets for the arguments left unresolved, for the times she'd been too tired or too busy to truly see the people she loved while they were still with her. We should rest, Declan finally said, breaking the melancholy spell that had fallen over them. Tomorrow will be a long day. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until late afternoon, Declan constantly scanning for signs of the Blackwell gang's passage. Each evening, he would teach Zora more about handling the revolver, and her aim improved steadily under his patient instruction. On the 4th day, as they approached Wolf Creek, the landscape changed, becoming more rugged and densely forested. Declan led them off the main trail, following game paths that wound through the underbrush. The trading post is just beyond that ridge, he explained in a low voice as they dismounted to rest the horses. If I'm right, Blackwell and his men will be there or arriving soon. What's the plan? Zora asked, checking her revolver as he had taught her. Declan's expression grew serious. We observe first, count their numbers, assess the situation. There might be innocent folks at the trading post, and I won't risk their lives. And if we get a clear opportunity, then we alert the local law if there is any. If not, we find a way to separate them from their weapons and hold them until the marshal I telegraphed can arrive. Zora nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. After days of pursuit, the prospect of facing her attackers was suddenly terrifyingly real. Declan must have read her expression. You don't have to come any closer, he said gently. You could wait here with the horses. I'd understand. For a moment she considered it. The safety of distance, the avoidance of confronting the men who had destroyed her life. But then she remembered the flames consuming her home, the casual cruelty in their voices as they discussed killing her. No, she said firmly. I need to see this through. Pride flickered in Declan's eyes. Stay close to me, then, and remember what I taught you. They approached the trading post cautiously, leaving their horses concealed in a thicket and proceeding on foot. The post itself was a substantial log structure with a large stable attached and several smaller outbuildings scattered around it. A handful of horses were hitched outside, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. Finding a vantage point on a small rise overlooking the clearing, they settled in to watch. For nearly 2 hours, they observed the comings and goings of few trappers, a family in a wagon restocking supplies, the trading post owner sweeping the porch. There, Declan whispered suddenly, pointing to riders approaching from the north, 6 men on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of those who feared no law. Zora's breath caught as she recognized them, even at a distance, the distinctive dun horse of the leader, the red bandana one man wore around his neck, the way another sat slightly crooked in his saddle. "That's them," she confirmed, her voice tight. They watched as the gang dismounted and entered the trading post, leaving one man outside with the horses. Through the windows, they could see others inside the family they'd observed earlier, now preparing to leave, and an elderly man examining tools on a back wall. "We need to wait until the civilians are clear," Declan murmured. "And hope no more show up." They didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, the family loaded their purchases and departed, heading south away from the direction Zora and Declan had come. The elderly man followed shortly after, mounting a mule and heading east. "Now we need a distraction to separate them," Declan said, his mind clearly working through scenarios. If we could, his planning was interrupted by shouts from inside the trading post, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. Through the window, they could see a confrontation unfolding, the gang leader gesturing angrily at the shopkeeper, who was backing away with his hands raised. "Change of plans," Declan said grimly, checking his rifle. "It looks like they're not just trading." He turned to Zora, his expression serious. "I'm going to circle around to the back. When you hear my shot, create as much commotion as you can at the front, fire into the air, shout, anything to make them think there are more of us." "And then what?" she asked, fear and determination battling within her. "And then we improvise," he replied with a grim smile. "Stay low, stay hidden as much as possible, and remember they're not expecting resistance. That's our advantage." With that, he was gone, moving silently through the underbrush toward the back of the trading post. Zora watched him disappear, then turned her attention back to the building, counting seconds in her head as she positioned herself for the best angle. When Declan's shot rang out, followed immediately by shouts of alarm, Zora took a deep breath and fired 3 rapid shots into the air, then called out in her strongest voice, "You're surrounded! Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." Chaos erupted. The man guarding the horses dove for cover, while inside, shadows moved frantically behind the windows. A shot exploded from the trading post, splintering wood near Zora's position. She ducked lower, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Another shot from the back of the building, Declan's rifle, and then the sound of breaking glass. Zora risked a glance and saw 2 of the gang members burst through the front door, guns drawn. Acting on instinct, she fired at the ground near their feet, forcing them to dive back for the dubious safety of the doorway. From inside came more shouts, the distinct sound of a struggle, then a pained yell that didn't sound like Declan. Worry seized her, but she forced herself to maintain her position, continuing to fire occasionally to keep the men at the front pinned down. Suddenly, the side door of the trading post burst open, and Declan emerged, physically pushing the gang leader ahead of him, the man's hands bound behind his back. In one fluid motion, Declan took cover behind a water trough, pulling his captive down with him just as bullets splintered the wood where they had been standing. 3 down inside," he called to Zora. 3 more out front." Understanding his plan, Zora redirected her fire toward the front of the building, careful to aim high enough to avoid hitting anyone but close enough to keep them from getting a clear shot at Declan. "Your boss is caught," Declan shouted to the remaining gang members. "Surrender now and you'll get a fair trial. Keep fighting and you'll get a burial." For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then a voice called from inside, "How do we know you won't shoot us when we come out?" "You have my word as a former Union soldier and brother to Marshal Daniel Xavier," Declan replied. "Drop your guns and come out with your hands high, and you'll see tomorrow." Another long pause, then the sound of metal clattering on wood as guns were dropped. One by one, the remaining 3 men emerged, hands raised above their heads. Declan directed them to lie face down on the ground, then signaled for Zora to approach while he kept his rifle trained on them. Her legs trembling slightly with the aftermath of fear and exertion, Zora made her way down to the trading post. Inside, she found the shopkeeper shaken but unharmed, and 3 of the gang members secured with rope, one nursing what appeared to be a bullet wound to the shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Declan asked as she emerged, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No," she replied, surprised to realize it was true. "You?" He shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. "Your distraction worked perfectly. They never knew what hit them." Together, they secured the remaining outlaws, using rope from the trading post to bind them. The shopkeeper, recovering from his shock, offered to ride to the nearest town with the sheriff, some 20 miles away. "Tell him we've captured the Blackwell gang," Declan instructed as the man prepared to leave, "and that we're holding them for the territorial marshal." As dusk fell, Zora found herself standing guard over the bound men while Declan checked the perimeter one last time. The leader of the gang, Blackwell himself, she now knew, stared at her with undisguised hatred. "You should have died at that ranch," he spat. Zora looked at him, this man who had so casually destroyed everything she had left in the world. Hours earlier, she had imagined this moment would bring her satisfaction, perhaps even joy. Instead, she felt only a hollow sort of completion, like the closing of a book whose ending brought no pleasure, only finality. "You took everything I had," she said simply, her voice steady. "But here I am, and there you are." She turned away, his curses falling on deaf ears as she walked to where Declan stood on the porch. "It's done," he said as she approached. "The marshal should arrive by noon tomorrow." Zora nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion weighing on her. "What happens then?" "Justice happens," Declan replied. "They'll stand trial for multiple murders, theft, arson. With our testimony and the shopkeepers, they won't see daylight for decades, if ever." "And us?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. Declan turned to look at her, his expression softening in the gathering darkness. "That depends on what you want, Zora." The use of her name, spoken with such gentle concern, broke something open inside her. Tears she had held back for too long spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I've been focused on survival for so long, then on finding them. I haven't thought beyond that." Declan reached out hesitantly, then seemed to gather his courage and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide tonight, or tomorrow, or even next week." She looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her darkest moment and offered not just help but purpose. In the days they had traveled together, she had come to respect his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of right and wrong, the gentleness that balanced his capable toughness. "What about you?" she asked. "What happens for you after tomorrow?" He glanced away, then back to her. "I was thinking of heading south, maybe to Colorado. There's land there, good ranching country, they say." A pause, then, carefully, "It would be a hard journey alone." The invitation in his words was clear but undemanding. Zora thought of her burned homestead, of the emptiness that awaited her there. Then she thought of the past days with Declan, of the sense of possibility that had begun to stir within her despite everything. "I've never seen Colorado," she said softly. Hope kindled in his eyes. "It's beautiful country from what I've surveyed. Good water, good grazing. Good place to start over?" "The best," he replied, his voice warm with conviction. Zora felt something unfurl inside her, not happiness. Not yet, but perhaps its precursor. Hope. The future stretching before her was no longer a vast emptiness but a path with possibility, one she might not have to walk alone. "I'd like to see it," she said finally. "After tomorrow, after justice is done." Declan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then you will." They stayed up through the night, taking turns watching their prisoners, catching moments of rest on the trading post's wooden chairs. By morning, Zora felt a strange sense of peace. The capture of the Blackwell gang hadn't erased her losses, hadn't brought back Thomas or Emma or restored her home. But it had closed a chapter, allowed her to look forward rather than back. When the territorial marshal arrived just before noon, accompanied by 3 deputies and the shopkeeper who had gone for help, the transfer of prisoners was efficiently handled. Declan and Zora gave their statements, providing details of the attack on her ranch and the confrontation at the trading post. "You two did good work," the marshal said when they had finished. "Dangerous work that should have been left to lawmen, but good work nonetheless." He paused, studying Declan. "Xavier, you say? Any relation to Daniel Xavier?" "My brother," Declan replied. The marshal nodded solemnly. "He was a good man, a credit to the badge. He'd be proud of what you did here today." As the lawmen prepared to depart with their prisoners, Blackwell looked back at Zora one last time. "You'll never replace what you lost," he called out, his voice bitter with defeat. Zora met his gaze steadily. "I'm not trying to replace it," she replied. "I'm building something new." They watched the procession disappear down the trail, the chapter of vengeance finally closed. Declan turned to her, a question in his eyes. "Colorado." Zora looked at him, this man who had become so important to her in so short a time. The future was uncertain, full of challenges yet to be faced. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt ready to meet them. "Colorado," she agreed. As they mounted their horses and turned south, Zora realized that when she had said, "I have nothing left" on that terrible night outside her burning home, she had been wrong. She had herself, her strength, her resilience, her capacity to begin again. And now she had Declan too, this unexpected companion who had shown her that sometimes, in the midst of losing everything, you find exactly what you need. It would be a long journey to Colorado, an even longer one to whatever future awaited them there. But as they rode side by side into the setting sun, Zora felt the first genuine smile in months touch her lips. Perhaps Declan had been right all along. Perhaps having each other really was plenty.